Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It all started on one of those ordinary mornings at work. The kind you don't think will leave any trace on your memory. I had my coffee cup balanced carefully in one hand, papers tucked under my arm, rushing as always to make it to the small conference room before the day picked up its usual pace. I've been in the same office for more than a decade, and yet, somehow, there are still moments that surprise me. That morning was one of them. I noticed Daniel standing by the window. He's a colleague of mine, a man I'd known casually for years. We weren't close in the way friends are, but we had always respected each other. He was steady, dependable, the kind of person you could trust with a deadline. He glanced at me, then back out toward the street below. Something in his posture felt different, tighter, almost hesitant. "Morning," I said lightly, expecting him to return the greeting and carry on. Instead, he smiled faintly and asked if I had a moment. I remember tilting my head, surprised. He wasn't usually one to ask for personal conversations. "Of course," I said, setting my coffee down. He shifted, almost as if gathering courage, and then said he needed some advice. The way he phrased it, soft, careful, made me pause. Advice about what? We were colleagues, not confidants. Still, I gestured for him to sit, curious. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. He began talking slowly, telling me about a challenge he was facing, not with work, but with himself. He spoke of uncertainty, of feeling like he'd lost his direction. I listened, nodding gently, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. At first, I offered the kind of advice anyone might give. Take it one day at a time, remind yourself of your strengths, look at how much you've already accomplished. But as he went on, I realized this wasn't about solving a single problem. It was about something deeper, something that had been building inside him for years, hidden behind his calm demeanor. He told me he admired how I seemed to carry myself with quiet assurance, how I balanced responsibility with kindness. I felt my cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. I wasn't sure what to say, so I simply held his gaze for a moment, letting silence do the work words couldn't. There was a stillness between us then, not uncomfortable, but weighted. I realized he hadn't just come to me for advice. He had come for connection. For someone to truly see him, maybe for the first time in a long while. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands together, and said softly, "Sometimes, we don't need advice. Sometimes, we just need someone to listen." His shoulders dropped, as though I had lifted something heavy from them. And then he smiled, not the polite smile of an office interaction, but something more genuine, almost boyish. The rest of that morning felt different. We talked not only about his worries but about life in general, the kind of conversation that drifts naturally, without force. He asked about my family, about the choices I had made, about regrets and lessons. And for once, I found myself opening up too, sharing pieces of my story I hadn't expected to. The sunlight shifted across the table as the hours passed. I noticed the way the light fell across his face, softening the lines at his eyes. He listened to me in a way few people ever had, with patience, with care, with no urge to interrupt. When the meeting we were both supposed to attend had long since ended, I glanced at the clock and laughed. "We've lost track of time." He chuckled too, though there was a seriousness behind his eyes. "I didn't want this moment to end," he admitted. There it was, the truth, simple and raw. And yet, it wasn't unsettling. Instead, it felt grounding. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people, finally speaking honestly after years of nothing more than polite exchanges. I walked away from that conversation with my heart unexpectedly light. I couldn't fully explain it, but I knew something had shifted. He hadn't just wanted advice. He had wanted understanding. And somehow, in offering him that, I had found a piece of understanding for myself too. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen with another cup of coffee, I replayed our words in my mind. The way he had looked at me, the gratitude in his voice. It stayed with me. And I realized some encounters, even the quiet ones, have the power to linger far longer than you expect, and this was only the beginning. The days that followed carried an odd energy with them. I found myself noticing Daniel more than I had before. It wasn't as though he suddenly became a different person, but the awareness between us had changed. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, There was a quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken understanding that something meaningful had begun in that small conference room. He came to my desk one afternoon, hesitating like he didn't want to intrude. I looked up from my computer and smiled, and in that moment, his whole expression softened, as though my simple recognition gave him permission to speak. "Could we talk again sometime?" he asked, voice low but steady. "Of course," I said, not even needing to think about it. We agreed to meet after work, away from the noise of the office. There was a little cafe a few blocks down, nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with worn wooden tables and warm light that made everything feel less rushed. I chose a corner seat, where the window overlooked the street. When he arrived, I noticed how he looked around first, as if making sure this was really happening. The conversation began with small things, how the day had gone, the usual details of office life. But it didn't stay there for long. He asked me questions that felt personal, yet respectful. About choices I had made, about times I had doubted myself, about moments when life had forced me to grow in unexpected ways. I found myself sharing stories I rarely spoke aloud. My early years in the company, when I felt invisible. The struggles I carried at home when no one at work could have guessed. The quiet strength it took to keep showing up. And as I spoke, I realized I wasn't just telling him my story, I was hearing it myself in a new way, as if his listening gave my words more weight. He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table, eyes never leaving mine. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that," he said softly, and then it was his turn. He told me about his doubts, about the weight of expectations, about how easy it was to look steady on the outside while feeling uncertain inside. There was nothing dramatic in his confession, just an honest truth that resonated deeply. The air between us grew heavier, though not with discomfort. It was as though every word carried something unseen, something unspoken, but deeply felt. I could hear the clink of cups around us, the murmur of other conversations, yet none of it touched the space we were in. At one point, he grew quiet. I thought perhaps he had run out of things to say, but then he asked, almost reluctantly, "Do you ever wonder if people cross paths for a reason?" I held my breath for a moment, because I had asked myself that very question many times in my life. "Yes," I answered simply. "I think some people arrive exactly when we need them to." His eyes softened, and in them, I saw a reflection of my own thoughts, an understanding that we were no longer just colleagues. This was something else. Not rushed, not defined yet, but undeniably real. When we finally stood to leave, the sky had darkened into evening, the street lamps glowing faintly in the cool air. We walked side by side, and though our hands never touched, I could feel the nearness of him in every step. At the corner, where we had to part ways, he paused. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than the sounds of passing cars. I nodded, feeling words wouldn't do justice to the weight of what I was feeling. "We'll talk again soon." As I watched him walk away, I realized this was no longer just about advice or conversation. Something had shifted deep inside both of us. It was subtle, almost fragile, but it was there, a connection that seemed destined to grow. That night, lying awake in bed, I thought about the look in his eyes when he asked if people crossed paths for a reason. I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of a journey neither of us had expected, but both of us had quietly longed for, and I wondered what path it might lead us down next. The following weeks carried a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Work felt the same on the surface: emails, meetings, reports piling up as always, but beneath it all, something had shifted. It was as though an invisible thread now connected me and Daniel. A glance across the room meant more than words. A short exchange in the hallway carried layers of meaning that no one else could hear. I would catch myself anticipating our talks. It wasn't about romance, not in the way people might assume. It was deeper than that. It was about being seen, about feeling heard in a way that made me rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. He had become a mirror for truths I had long avoided, and I wondered if I was the same for him. One rainy evening, he suggested we take a walk before heading home. The streets glistened with reflections of neon signs and blurred headlights. The air was cool, carrying that earthy smell only rain can bring. I wrapped my coat tighter, while he carried his umbrella, though half the time he forgot to hold it properly over himself. We walked slowly, letting the rhythm of our steps fill the silence. Finally, he broke it. "You know, I never expected to find someone I could talk to like this. Not here. Not now." I glanced at him, the lamplight catching the seriousness in his eyes. Neither did I admitted. We stopped at a small park. The benches were slick with rain, but the sound of water dripping from the trees made the world feel hushed, as if it belonged only to us. He leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "There's something I've been afraid to say," he confessed. "Afraid because I don't want to change what we already have. But I can't pretend anymore." I felt my breath catch, though I stayed silent, waiting. He turned his gaze toward me. "When I first asked for advice, I didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't just advice I wanted, it was you. I needed someone who could look at me and see more than the surface. And somehow, you did." The words sank into me, stirring emotions I hadn't expected to feel at this stage of my life. I wasn't a young woman anymore, waiting for some storybook moment. I had lived through enough to know how rare it was to find honesty like this. "I see you," I said quietly, almost to myself. "And I think I needed you too." He exhaled, as if the weight of weeks had finally lifted. There was no need for dramatic gestures. The truth was enough. We stayed there for a long time, talking about what we feared and what we hoped for. He told me about missed chances in his past, about the way he had convinced himself to settle for less than what he wanted. I shared my own regrets, my own lessons, the times I had hidden behind responsibility and forgotten to nurture myself. There was a gentleness in the way he listened, and I realized that what was growing between us wasn't built on impulse or desire, it was built on trust. When the rain finally eased, we walked back, slower than before. At the corner where we always parted, he hesitated, then said softly, "Promise me we won't let this fade. Whatever it is, whatever it becomes, let's not lose it." I felt the depth of his words settle in my chest. "I promise," I said that night, as I sat by my window watching the last drops of rain streak down the glass. I knew this was no passing moment. This connection was carving itself into the fabric of my life. Unexpected, yes, but also undeniable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet thrill of possibility. Something was unfolding, and though I didn't know where it would lead, I was ready to follow. Weeks turned into months, and the connection between Daniel and me deepened in ways neither of us had predicted. Yet it remained respectful, careful, built not on impulsive emotions but on the quiet strength of mutual understanding. We still met at work, exchanged polite greetings in front of others, but the moments we carved out for ourselves felt like stepping into a different world entirely. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves swirled along the sidewalks and the daylight slipped away earlier than usual, we met again at that same small cafe. The wooden tables were scattered with a few patrons, the warm glow of the lamps softening the edges of the room. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise, but inside there was only stillness. We didn't rush into conversation. Instead, we sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. I watched him as he stirred his tea absent-mindedly, his brow furrowed as though he were gathering his thoughts. There was something different in his manner that evening, not nervous, but serious. Finally, he looked at me. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've shared," he said. "About how much you've helped me, and about what this connection means." I felt my heart steady, waiting. He continued. "You've reminded me of who I used to be. Before all the pressure, before all the expectations. You've helped me see my life differently. I can't thank you enough for that." He paused, then added softly, "But I also don't want to hold you back. I don't want what we have to feel like a burden or a secret." His words struck me with their honesty. There was no demand in them, no assumption, only care. I reached across the table, my hand resting just near his, not quite touching but close enough for him to know he wasn't alone. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what we've built isn't a burden. It's been a gift. But you're right, connections like this can't stay in the shadows forever. They have to find their place in our lives, or they fade." He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "So where do we go from here?" I took a breath, letting the question settle inside me. The truth was, I didn't know the answer either. We were both at points in our lives where responsibilities, histories, and quiet compromises shaped every choice. But I also knew that what we had already shared had changed us both. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever path we choose, it should be one we walk with honesty and respect. That's what matters." He looked up then, and for the first time in weeks, a smile touched his lips, a soft, genuine smile that spoke of relief more than anything else. Honesty and respect, he repeated, as if the words were an anchor. We stayed there a while longer, talking about practical things, projects at work, plans for the coming season, but beneath it all was a quiet acceptance. We had reached a turning point. Whether we drifted apart or found a way to keep this connection alive, we would both leave this chapter with something valuable, a reminder of what it meant to truly see another person. When we finally stood to leave, I noticed how the air outside had turned cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. The city lights flickered like small stars in the distance. We walked side by side again, slower than usual, and when we reached the corner where we always parted, he stopped. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I'll never forget this. You've changed the way I look at life." I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not sadness, not joy, but something deeper, something whole. "And you've reminded me that it's never too late to rediscover yourself," I replied. We stood there for a moment longer, neither of us speaking, just sharing the silence. Then, with a small nod, we went our separate ways. That night, sitting by my window once more, I realized how much I had grown from the experience. It had started with a simple request for advice, but it had become a journey of self-discovery for both of us. We had found connection, honesty, and respect, not in grand gestures, but in quiet conversations that left echoes long after the words had ended. As the city settled into sleep around me, I understood that some encounters don't need to be defined to matter. They leave you stronger, clearer, more alive. And though Daniel and I had stepped into an uncertain future, I felt at peace knowing that the memory of this connection would remain a guiding light for years to come.